The house tour began promptly at 2 p.m., with Mom leading a parade of aunts, uncles and family friends through what she proudly called Vikram's new home. I watched from the kitchen while she gestured expansively at the renovated living room, explaining how my brother had finally achieved the success he deserved. The whole place needed updating when he bought it, Mom announced to the assembled relatives, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a mother whose predictions had been vindicated. Maya was living here temporarily, but Vikram saw the potential immediately. Living here temporarily. I'd been the legal owner for 3 years, having purchased the Victorian house from an estate sale and spent countless weekends restoring its original features. What my family didn't know was that the ownership transfer they were celebrating had never actually occurred. Show them the master bedroom beta, Dad urged Vikram, who basked in the attention like someone accepting an award he'd legitimately earned. The renovation work is exceptional. The master bedroom that Vikram was about to show off featured hand-restored crown molding, period-appropriate wallpaper, and a custom walk-in closet that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. All paid for with money from my software consulting business that my family assumed was entry-level computer work. Maya helped with some of the manual labor, Vikram added generously, as if I'd been a helpful assistant rather than the person who'd planned, funded and supervised every aspect of the restoration. Manual labor. I'd coordinated with historic preservation specialists, master craftsmen and architectural consultants to ensure that every renovation honored the house's 1890s heritage while incorporating modern functionality. Aunt Priya emerged from the powder room with an expression of genuine admiration. Vikram, this is absolutely stunning. You must be doing very well at the investment firm. Vikram's position as a junior analyst at a mid-tier investment firm paid approximately $60,000 annually. Enough for a decent apartment, but nowhere near sufficient for purchasing and renovating a house currently appraised at $1.4 million. The real estate market has been good to us, Vikram replied with the confident vagueness of someone who'd never actually navigated a property purchase. The real estate market had indeed been profitable for me, through strategic acquisitions and developments across 3 different markets. But my family's understanding of my career remained frozen at, Maya does something with computers. And Maya's moving out soon? Asked Uncle Raj, apparently concerned about logistics rather than wondering how a junior analyst had acquired such valuable property. Next month, Mom confirmed. It's time for her to find her own place. This house needs a family that can really appreciate it. A family that could really appreciate it. I glanced around the kitchen where I'd been preparing lunch, noting the custom cabinetry I'd commissioned from local artisans, the restored vintage fixtures I'd hunted down through specialty dealers, and the commercial-grade appliances I'd installed for serious cooking. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney. Ownership documentation ready for delivery as requested. Courier scheduled for 3:30 p.m. Perfect timing. The family tour was scheduled to conclude at 4 p.m. with a celebration dinner where they'd toast Vikram's achievement and discuss his plans for the property. Maya, could you help serve the refreshments? Neha, Vikram's wife, appeared in the kitchen doorway with the expectant expression of someone assigning tasks to available staff. We have the relatives here and presentation is important. Presentation was indeed important. In 30 minutes, the relatives would discover that the house they were admiring belonged to the person they'd relegated to serving refreshments. Of course, I said, arranging the appetizers I'd prepared on serving platters that had cost more than Vikram's monthly salary. The tour continued upstairs, where Mom's commentary grew more elaborate as she showed off the guest bedrooms, the home office and the renovated bathrooms. Through the windows I could see neighbors working in their gardens, unaware that the house they knew as my carefully maintained residence was being celebrated as someone else's achievement. The property taxes alone must be substantial, observed Cousin Arjun, apparently the only person wondering about the financial realities of such ownership. Vikram's doing very well, Dad replied with the vague confidence of someone who'd never seen actual financial documentation. Very well. Vikram's investment firm was currently under investigation for several questionable practices, and his position was rumored to be among those targeted for elimination in the next round of cost-cutting measures. At 3:25 I positioned myself near the front window where I could watch for the courier's arrival while my family concluded their celebration tour. The celebration continued in the dining room, where relatives gathered around the antique mahogany table I'd purchased from a Connecticut estate sale and had professionally restored to museum quality. Mom served tea in the Wedgwood china set that had belonged to the house's original owners, which I'd acquired along with other period-appropriate furnishings. "Vikram, you must tell us about your investment strategy," urged Uncle Raj, settling into one of the Chippendale chairs I'd reupholstered with historically accurate fabric. Property acquisition at this level requires sophisticated financial planning. Vikram's investment strategy, such as it was, involved modest contributions to a 401k and occasional stock purchases based on social media recommendations. But he nodded sagely, as if managing complex real estate portfolios was routine work. "Diversification is key," he replied, using the kind of generic financial language that sounded impressive to people unfamiliar with actual investment principles. "What about the renovation costs?" asked Aunt Priya, admiring the crown molding that had required specialized craftsmen charging premium rates for authentic restoration techniques. "This level of work must have been expensive." "You have to invest in quality," Vikram said, gesturing toward architectural details that had cost more than his annual gross salary. Dad beamed with paternal pride as relatives praised his son's business acumen and sophisticated taste. The narrative they'd constructed cast Vikram as a successful young professional who'd achieved rapid career advancement while maintaining family values. "Maya's been helpful during the transition," Neha added, apparently wanting to acknowledge my presence without overemphasizing it. "She understands the house's quirks better than anyone." Understanding the house's quirks involved intimate knowledge of its electrical systems, plumbing configurations, and structural characteristics acquired through 3 years of hands-on restoration work. But my family interpreted my familiarity as the result of temporary residence rather than ownership. "Will you miss living here?" asked Cousin Mira, directing the question to me with polite interest. "The house has been wonderful," I replied diplomatically, avoiding specifics about how I'd miss living in my own property. "Maya's ready for her next adventure," Mom said brightly, as if my departure were a voluntary life change rather than eviction from property I legally owned. My next adventure would actually involve deciding whether to allow my family to continue their celebration tour or to interrupt it with documentation that would end the party immediately. At 3:20, I noticed the courier van turning onto our street, its driver consulting GPS coordinates for the address where legal documents would definitively resolve questions about property ownership. "Vikram, show them the basement renovation," suggested Dad, apparently wanting to showcase every aspect of the property. "The workshop area is particularly impressive." The workshop area featured professional woodworking equipment, restoration tools, and storage systems for the building materials I'd accumulated during 3 years of renovation projects. Vikram had been down there exactly twice, both times to retrieve items I'd stored for him. "This space has incredible potential," Vikram told the relatives, speaking about facilities he'd never used and equipment he wouldn't know how to operate. Incredible potential that I'd been systematically developing through careful planning, substantial investment, and countless hours of skilled labor. At 3:25, the doorbell rang. "Are you expecting someone?" Mom asked, looking mildly annoyed by the interruption to their celebration tour. "Delivery," I said, moving toward the front door where a uniformed courier waited with an official envelope. "Maya Patel?" the courier asked, checking his delivery receipt against my identification. "That's correct." I signed for the package while my family gathered behind me, their curiosity about the mysterious delivery temporarily overriding their house tour enthusiasm. "What kind of delivery requires a signature?" Vikram asked, apparently concerned that outside business might interfere with his celebration. "Legal documents," I replied, opening the envelope to reveal the property deed, ownership transfer records, and mortgage documentation that would transform their afternoon celebration into something much less comfortable. "Legal documents about what?" Dad asked, his surgeon's precision recognizing the significance of official paperwork even before understanding its contents. "Property ownership," I said, handing him the deed that listed my name as sole owner, with a purchase date 3 years before Vikram's supposed acquisition. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the vintage grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking the seconds as my family's celebration dissolved around them. Through the dining room doorway, I could see relatives seated around my table, waiting for the tour to resume, unaware that everything they'd been told about the house's ownership was about to be revealed as elaborate fiction. The property deed contained comprehensive documentation that painted an undeniable picture of ownership spanning 3 years, including purchase records, mortgage statements, insurance policies, and tax documentation, all bearing my name as the sole legal owner. "This says Maya Patel, purchased August 2021, Dad read aloud, his voice growing quieter with each word. Purchase price $1.2 million. The relatives in the dining room had grown quiet, sensing that something significant was happening in the foyer but unable to hear the specific details being discussed. "There must be some mistake," Mom said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Vikram arranged the purchase through his investment contacts. Vikram has never been involved in any property transaction related to this house," I said, pulling additional documents from the envelope. "Here are 3 years of mortgage payments, property tax records, and insurance documentation." Vikram's face had drained of color as he processed the implications. His celebration tour had been based on fiction that was now being demolished by legal reality. "Maya, I don't understand," he said finally. "You told us you were renting here temporarily." "I never told you I was renting. You assumed I was renting because you couldn't imagine me owning property like this." The truth was more complex. For 3 years my family had known I lived in this house but had never asked about ownership arrangements, assuming that someone with my computer job couldn't afford real estate in this neighborhood. "But the renovation costs." Neha's voice trailed off as she realized that the improvements she'd been crediting to Vikram's financial success had actually been funded by someone else entirely. "Approximately $400,000 in restoration work," I confirmed. "All documented here with contractor receipts and permit records." Uncle Raj appeared in the foyer, drawn by the increasingly serious conversation. "Is everything all right? The relatives are wondering about continuing the tour." "The tour is over," I announced. "And there won't be a housewarming celebration." "What do you mean?" Uncle Raj asked, looking confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. "This house belongs to Maya," Dad said quietly, still holding the deed that had destroyed their afternoon's narrative. "It always has." The news rippled through the dining room as relatives overheard the conversation and began understanding that everything they'd been told about Vikram's property acquisition had been based on misunderstandings rather than facts. "Maya owns this house?" Aunt Priya's voice carried from the dining room, where the celebration had transformed into confused murmuring. "For 3 years," I confirmed, walking back into the dining room where relatives sat around my table, looking uncertain about whether they should continue eating refreshments or prepare to leave. "Vikram, why did you say you'd bought it?" asked cousin Arjun directly. "I thought." Vikram struggled to explain without admitting he'd deliberately misled everyone. "There were discussions about property arrangements." "What kind of discussions?" Uncle Raj pressed. "Family discussions about Maya eventually moving out so we could move in," Vikram admitted, revealing the assumption that had led to months of celebration about property he'd never owned. The relatives began gathering their belongings with the awkward efficiency of people who discovered they were celebrating fiction. Outside, neighbors continued their weekend activities, unaware that the housewarming party they'd probably expected to hear had ended before it began. The aftermath unfolded with swift and lasting consequences that my family hadn't anticipated when they planned their celebration tour. Vikram's colleagues at the investment firm learned about the property acquisition incident when relatives mentioned it at social gatherings, raising questions about his judgment and honesty that contributed to his termination during the next round of layoffs. Mom's social circle grew uncomfortable when she tried to explain the misunderstanding about property ownership, particularly after people had already congratulated her on her son's success. Dad's golf partners who'd been invited to future gatherings at Vikram's beautiful home received awkward corrections that highlighted how little the family actually understood about my financial situation. The most lasting consequence was the establishment of clear boundaries. My family's assumptions about my living arrangements, career prospects, and willingness to provide free housing ended permanently. 6 months later, I sold the house and purchased a larger property in an even more exclusive neighborhood. My family learned about it through social media the same way distant acquaintances did. Uncle Raja's suggestion that I help Vikram get back on his feet by offering him property management opportunities met with professional hiring standards that family connections couldn't override. The antique dining room table still hosts dinner parties, but now for guests who understand that ownership and residency aren't subject to family vote or wishful thinking. The property deed from that afternoon remains framed in my new home office, a reminder that sometimes the most important documents are the ones that prove what people assumed they already knew.